So we get to finally talk about another iPhone that was easily a very interesting phone when it first came out, and it's still kind of living to this day one way or another. And this specific iPhone is the iPhone 8. Now, this device came out in 2017, and although it hasn't been sold by Apple for a couple of years now, what's very interesting is the body is still kind of being sold. The iPhone SE second generation is a phone that Apple is still selling, and the third generation looks to be right around the corner. But the most interesting thing about the iPhone 8 is that the body of this phone was reincarnated in that iPhone SE second generation, and because of that, this phone still kind of lives on there, which is really interesting. So although this body is, a couple years old, it's still being sold in a way, which is really, really interesting. Now, I wouldn't really recommend buying the iPhone 8 as like your main device right now, but if you need to buy it, I would say go for it. It's not like a horrible phone, but there are some phones like the iPhone 10 that came out that same year that will definitely give you a much better experience than this device. Now, on the outside, specifically on the front, it's really not a bad looking phone. I mean, it still looks pretty current. I'm sure everyone remembers when iPhones had home buttons, and most of you probably still have an iPhone like this, which there's no issue with that. We have Touch ID 2 on the front, we have a 4.7-inch panel, front-facing camera, and overall the front of these phones still look extremely good. We have the lightning port at the bottom, no headphone jack or anything, but it's totally okay. And on the back, we actually do have wireless charging, which is awesome. This was one of the first iPhones to bring wireless charging, and we have a glass back as well. Now, when you feel this phone in the hand, as I've mentioned before, this is a very good feeling phone. It doesn't feel cheap, it feels extremely premium still, and you can probably find these things for like less than $200-$300 in so many places, and because of that, that makes this iPhone a pretty appealing deal to some people. But to me included, I probably would recommend going up to the iPhone 10. This seems to be a much better idea, but with something like an iPhone 8, I really don't think that's a bad idea either, to be honest. So in terms of the outside, that covers it up there, but we do have the camera setup on this phone that we have to talk about. Now, this thing had that single 12 megapixel camera on the back, and it wasn't a bad camera. You also had a 7 megapixel front facing camera. Now, this was one of the first iPhones to bring 4K at 60 on the back of these phones, and I will definitely tell you the camera on this thing isn't that bad. It's actually still a pretty decent camera in this day and age. Is it perfect? Is it amazing? Probably not. You're missing out on things like portrait mode, cinematic mode, different things like that. You're also missing 4K at 60 on the front, but my biggest disadvantage with this phone is the lack of an ultra-wide sensor or telephoto lens. I love the ability of zooming in and zooming out of a lot of photos, and that's something that I get with the 13 Pros. Even since the 11 Pros, we have those capabilities. Unfortunately, with the iPhone 8, we really don't have that going on, but it's totally okay. Like I mentioned, this phone came out in 2017. That's almost 5 years ago, when you consider the month that this thing came out too. And when you consider all that, it kind of makes sense why this phone was what it was. It wasn't supposed to be the flagship of that time, and if you wanted to get more features, you can go for the iPhone 8 Plus or the iPhone 10. For everything that I do with the phone nowadays, I think the iPhone 8 would be able to handle it, things like Snapchat and TikTok and different things like that, but it would be kind of cool to have a phone like the iPhone 8 because it still has a pretty decent camera for sure. So in terms of the camera setup, that pretty much covers it up there. Now, another big interesting aspect about the iPhone 8 is its software. It's still supported with software as of right now, and one thing that I kind of have been saying the last couple of years is that the iPhone 10, hang with me here, the iPhone 10 was going to last as long as the iPhone XS and 10R, but the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 8 have the same chipset, so if the iPhone 10 lasts that long, the iPhone 8 may also last the long it's going to if the iPhone 10 lasts that. So there's no way to put it, but as of right now, the iPhone 8 is still supported with software, and I think this phone is going to go probably another 2 to 3 years of software support. So if you get this phone today, best believe that you're definitely going to be lasting the rest of this year, and about halfway through next year, you're going to be lasting that extra year on top of that, which I think is going to happen, and then maybe even a year on top of that, who knows. So in terms of software, it's still a great phone. It has a lot of capability, but that really pretty much covers it up there. Now let's go ahead on the performance of this thing. This thing had that Apple A11 Bionic chip inside of it with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now this was one of the last iPhones to actually bring 2 gigabytes of RAM for a brand new device, and I will definitely tell you, even as of right now, getting something like the iPhone 8 is a very interesting device, mostly because the performance isn't crazy great, but it's really not that bad either. It's a very average performing device when you consider the price tag. I would consider something like an iPhone 7 a better value per dollar in terms of performance, just because it's substantially cheaper than the iPhone 8. As of right now, these iPhone 8s are still kind of high in value just because the iPhone SE 2, they kind of look alike. And because of that, the iPhone 8s are very interesting values for sure. Now, for day-to-day applications and day-to-day tasks, things like Snapchat, TikTok, Google Calendar, iCloud Notes, things like that, this phone will be able to handle pretty much everything you throw at it. In fact, I think an iPhone 5S can pretty much handle those things. There's really nothing super insane going on with this specific phone in those areas. However, with something like, when you're going up to heavier, intensive, or even mildly intensive things like, occasional video editing big documents, and specifically with multitasking, if you're trying to multitask a bunch of applications in the background, the iPhone 8 is definitely going to show its age because it only has 2 gigs of RAM. That is half the amount of RAM as an iPhone 11, and that's already like 2 years old at this point. So with something like an iPhone 8, really the main issue you're going to have is within the multitasking panels. Other than that, if you're looking at apps that are opening and we're comparing opening speeds and all that stuff, of course the iPhone 8 isn't going to be as fast as something like an iPhone 13, but it's still going to do a pretty decent job, and I would still probably recommend something like an iPhone 11 or an iPhone 10 just because they give you more RAM. But also with something like the home button design on the iPhone 8, it does sometimes appear to be a little bit slower than you would expect, specifically when you're opening and closing apps. After that, you don't really have to interact with the home button, but when you're actually using the home button and you're maneuvering through things, it does kind of seem a little bit outdated occasionally. It's not an everyday, thing, but it is something that I've kind of seen every once in a while, and it's something that I should probably note here in this video as well. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, hitting on the battery life of this specific phone, we had a 1821 mAh battery. Now, here's the thing with this specific device. I don't think, it's a horrible battery life, but it really wasn't that great when it first came out, and it's really only gotten worse. Currently right now on iOS 15, this thing hasn't been doing so well with battery life, but again, I think by the time iOS 15 is done, towards the end of the couple of cycles, it's probably going to be in a better situation. But it's also not, a good thing where this phone is just constantly just not performing that well in terms of battery life, even the first day that it came out. So because of that, I probably would recommend, if you want to get a phone that's going to last you a little bit better in terms of battery life, getting something like an iPhone 10 is going to do that for you, but even that's not going to be as good as an iPhone 11, and the iPhone 11 isn't as good as the iPhone 13. So there is always something better for the most part, but even then, you're definitely not going to be doing yourself any favors if you get the iPhone 8. It does have wireless charging, which is nice, but you're going to be in a better situation if you pick up something like a newer phone with a bigger size battery. That will always lead you in a better situation than getting something that's already a couple years old, that already had a small battery, and it's probably degraded since then. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now, ending it off, and to kind of sum up this whole entire video, I think the iPhone 8 is still a very interesting phone in this day and age. That's pretty much what I said when I started off this video. It's definitely not a perfect phone, but it really wasn't, supposed to be. It's still a very solid phone in so many different ways. The build quality is still very good. This was one of the last home button iPhones. It still performs fairly well, but the things that kind of, knock me the most are probably the camera. It's definitely not amazing, but it's definitely okay, I think, for the most time. The battery life really isn't as good anymore, and that's probably my biggest disadvantage with this phone. The battery life really isn't that great, and I would probably recommend any other phone that came out after this just because the battery life is so much better. The iPhone XR was the cheapest phone the year after, and that is a much better phone than this one in my opinion. So in terms of everything, that pretty much covers it up for the most part. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.